Kia ora, and welcome to a brand new series called Sam's Take, with me, Sam Rillstone, covering entertainment news and reviews. For our very first episode, we're going to dive into the first 2 episodes of the new Disney Plus series Loki. Just a disclaimer, there might be some mild spoilers ahead, but there'll be a separate section later on with some full-on spoilers. The series picks up during the events of Avengers Endgame, when the modern-day Avengers travel back to 2012 and the Battle of New York. An alternate version, or a variant, of Loki, played by Tom Hiddleston, steals the Tesseract before being captured by the TVA, or the Time Variance Authority, who they exist outside of time and space and monitor this thing called the Sacred Timeline. They give Loki a choice: face being erased from reality, or help them with a greater threat. After 10 years and 6 previous appearances, Hiddleston is clearly more than comfortable in this role as the God of Mischief, and is having the time of his life chewing scenery and popping quips. Owen Wilson's TVA agent Mobius is an excellent foil to Loki, echoing his intelligence and strategic mind superior to those around them. The only difference being that Loki wants and needs people to know just how smart he is. The story raises interesting ideas around who's to say what is right and wrong and what's worthy to transpire in the sacred timeline. As the heads of the TVA, the Timekeepers, are the ones who determine this. Does free will even exist? Seemingly not, for now. Also, the idea of a set timeline and a group determining that timeline and policing that reality is interesting in terms of Doctor Strange. Strange, of course, was able to use the Time Stone in Avengers Infinity War to see all the possibilities of the Avengers battle with Thanos and accurately pick the one where they win. But was this always meant to happen? Do the Timekeepers have a morally good agenda, or do they have their own nefarious one? Loki is the perfect character to question this idea of a timeline police, as questioning authority has kind of been his whole shtick up until now. He does it in a very tongue-in-cheek way compared to what a Captain America might do in the face of agendas and who's to say what's right and wrong, etc. Because he'd probably do something like fighting his new best mate with his old best mate, despite the fact that his new best mate's parents were murdered by his old best mate, because he wanted to protect his old best mate. Now, I've always thought that what Marvel did with Loki past Thor: The Dark World in 2013 was a bit hit and miss. He was intended to die in that movie, and of course seemingly did, before coming back. The death scene was meant to be the last appearance of the God of Mischief, but according to both Tom Hiddleston and President of Marvel Studios Kevin Feige, that didn't sit well with test audiences, so they had to kind of rejig it to bring him back. During the subsequent appearances of Loki, I felt that he's kind of yo-yoed between good and bad, and they've kind of passed it off as character development, which seems a little bit lazy in my opinion. Of course, the Loki in this new series is from 2012, or the first Avengers movie, which some would say is the character at peak evil. The first episode of the series does a really good job of shotgunning his entire character arc throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe in about a minute, and really cuts the character down to who he is, which is really just a small boy who feels cheated out of the throne, and just looking for attention in the only way that he knows how. The scene was very much a Buzz finds out that he's a toy and loses all sense of self kind of a moment. Frustratingly, there is still a little bit more yo-yoing from good and evil in episode 2, which is it does feel like we're retreading old ground. But Mobius's character does a really good job of frankly just psychoanalyzing Loki and using that to keep him on side. Head writer Michael Waldron and director Kate Herron have done a really good job of putting these two characters in a situation where it is a bit of a codependency, and there's wisecracks and quips between the two, but there is a sense of respect and camaraderie overall. I'm really enjoying the aesthetic of the show so far, especially the TVA. The architecture and particularly the faces on the Timekeeper statues looks like they've been inspired by Jack Kirby, who was a very famous artist for Marvel and even co-created a lot of their characters. I really enjoy the nonchalantness of the TVA employees. They're kind of sitting around dealing with the literal fabric of space, time and reality, and they just treat it like it's a normal office job, which for them it is. And doing it all using typewriters and an analog filing system. They can literally control the flow of time, but they're stuck in the 70s. The receptionist has actual Infinity Stones in his mail cart. For over 10 years, these stones have been the cornerstone of power in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and they literally wiped out half of life not, 3 years ago. This juxtaposition makes for a fun environment to just watch Loki sputter around in confusion as to how blasé the TVA are about the power that they hold. Also, special mention to composer Natalie Holt. Her work, particularly in the second episode, sets such a suspenseful tone, and the beat really reminded me of a ticking clock, which I suppose is fitting. So overall, I'm super excited to see where this series goes, both in terms of just general location and story as well, and the consequences it's going to have for the wider cinematic universe going forward. Full warning, For the rest of the video, it's going to be full spoilers, analysis, theories, rampant speculations of stuff that may or may not be coming true. But if you don't want to know anything about that, switch off the video now. For those of you who are still here, let's dive into some Easter eggs and theories. We should probably start with the end of episode 2 with the reveal of Lady Loki. Now, in the comics, Loki is an illusionist, a sorcerer, a shapeshifter, and he turns into lots of different forms throughout the course of the comics. One of which being a female, another being a child, and I'm pretty sure at one point he was a horse. Actress Sophia DiMartino plays this version of Lady Loki, but in my opinion, I don't actually think it's Lady Loki. I think it's the second version of Enchantress from the comics. The Enchantress is an Asgardian sorcerer who is actually one of Thor's most formidable foes in the comics, with powers of witchcraft and controlling people, which of course we saw at the end of episode 2. However, I'd hazard a guess that this is the second version of Enchantress, Sylvie Lushton, who's actually just a modern day Earth girl who's given Loki-like powers by Loki himself to use her as a pawn in his schemes. A few pieces of evidence that lend themselves to this theory are A, she obviously has blonde hair, B, she doesn't want to be referred to as Loki, and C, Loki says he would never treat himself like that. So that makes me think that it's not actually Lady Loki or a variant of Loki as the TVA believes, but Sylvie Lushton, second version of Enchantress. Given her origin in the comics, my thought is that she's been created by another variant of Loki to try and stop this Loki from achieving whatever his plan might be. But then it's also like, how would the Timekeepers not know about her? Who's to say? The multiverse is also a huge part of this series, clearly, but what exactly is it and what does it mean going forward? The idea of a multiverse was first mentioned in Spider-Man Far From Home by the villain Mysterio, and it was also a huge part of Avengers Endgame. Essentially all it is alternate realities caused by other possible outcomes to events in a singular timeline. And each of these realities is actually signified by a number. So the Marvel Comics, as in the comic books, is Earth 616, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe is Earth 199,999. Now in Loki, these events that cause these alternate realities are called Nexus level events. This actually links to another Marvel Disney Plus show, WandaVision, where one of the fake commercials was for an antidepressant-like pill called Nexus, which was said to bring you back to reality. It's also a reference to Nexus beings, which are beings that can essentially alter reality, one of which is Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch. Interestingly, the head writer, Michael Waldron, is also credited as a writer on the Doctor Strange sequel, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Given the emphasis on the multiverse and the Scarlet Witch slated to appear, I'd hazard a guess that the events of Loki will directly tie into the Doctor Strange sequel. For those of you who want a bit more information on the Timekeepers and the TVA, in the comics, the Timekeepers were created by He Who Remains, the director of the TVA at essentially the end of time. So when time was unraveling itself and it was all kind of really going pear-shaped, He Who Remains created the Timekeepers to protect time and make sure it stays on track. However, they are not the head of the TVA in the comics. A main storyline of the Timekeepers in the comics is the recruitment of the time-traveling supervillain, Immortus, who they charge with going back to the past to essentially fix the mess that his past self creates by time-traveling and messing with realities. This younger self goes by the name Kang the Conqueror. And Kang is from the 31st century, and again, a time-traveling supervillain who frequently has battles with the Avengers. And what's interesting about Kang is he's actually reportedly set to appear in the third Ant-Man and the Wasp sequel, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, as the main villain. It hasn't actually been confirmed by Marvel Studios themselves, but it's been reported that Lovecraft Country's Jonathan Majors is set to play Kang. In the comics, Immortus and the Timekeepers try to capture the Scarlet Witch because of her reality-altering powers. Now, does this mean because of the events of Loki, WandaVision, and possibly Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness that we're going to have the Scarlet Witch interacting with those characters? Only time will tell. The inclusion of all of this suggests that the multiverse is going to be an even larger part of the MCU going forward after this Loki series is over. Thanks for sticking around if you got this far, and I'll see you next time for more entertainment news and reviews.